wonder what's on TV.
Sorry about that. I don't know why the music stopped. Oh my god. Hello. Welcome, YouTube. Welcome, Twitch. Excuse me. Bum. Oh. Live another day, climb a little higher, find another reason to stay. Ash, hold on one second. I gotta go find my phone. Testing 1, 2, 3. Yes. Okay, it sounds good. It's a choice. So if you're looking for a time to run away, hey, hey, you won't find it here. Look another way. Won't find it here. So try another thing. They took pictures of our dreams. They took pictures of our dreams, ran to hide behind the stairs. Said maybe when it's right for you, they'll fall. It's my favorite part. So much, I'll listen to it again. Sometimes when I'm just chilling out, or even when I'm running, I'll just listen to the same part of a song over and over again, like this. This would be the bridge of the song, and it's my favorite part. They took pictures of our dreams. That saxophone. Is this the only Dream Theater song with the saxophone? I think Kenny G must have been some influence to this. I wonder who was on sax. My guess is Mike or John. More Dream Theater. Holy shit. Why do I feel so numb? Is it something to do with where I come from? Should this be fight or flight? I don't know why I'm constantly so uptight. Why do I feel? Run, try to hide for the world. for this complicated. It's in my phobia exists by anxiety. Run, try to hide all the world. Why this complexity? I don't know if my shuffle's on, so if it's another Dreams Theater song, I might have to switch it up. Okay, it's enough Dream Theater. I don't think the shuffle's on. Or maybe it is. Who knows? The 3 Dream Theater songs in a row?
Trying to get up that great big hill of hope for a destination. I realized quickly when I knew I should that the world was made up of this brotherhood of man, for whatever that means. Into a crisis times when I'm lying in bed just to get it all out what's in my head. And I am feeling a little peculiar. And so I wake in the morning and I step outside and I take a deep breath and I get real high and I scream from the top of my lungs, what's going on?
And I say, ooh. Oh my God, do I try?
I try all the time in this institution.
I need pray.
Oh my God, do I pray? I pray every single day for revolution. Into a crisis times when I'm lying in bed just to get it all out what's in my head. And I am feeling
A little peculiar.
into a wake in the morning and I step outside and I take a deep breath and I get real high and I scream from the top of my lungs, what's going on? And I say, hey, yeah, yeah, hey, yeah, yeah. I said, hey, what's going on? And I say, hey, yeah, yeah, hey, yeah, yeah. I said, hey, what's going on? And I say, hey, yeah, yeah, hey, yeah, yeah. I said, hey, what's going on? And I say, hey, yeah, yeah, hey, yeah, yeah. I said, hey, what's going on? Years and my life is still trying to get up that great big hill
Of heaven. Gave up trying to figure it out. The guy had knocked it all away. But I couldn't figure it out, so I pissed it all away. Get by the product virus. Pigs get what pigs deserve. Well, I'll lay down. I'm leaving today. Come. You gotta fix me up. Come, gotta fix me up. That happened away, but it doesn't matter anymore. It's going down. I want you to break me. I want you to break me. I want you to throw me away. I want you to break me. I want you to take me. I want you to break me. And I want you to throw me away. I want you to break me. I want you to take me. I want you to break me. I want you to throw me away. I want you to break me. I want you to take me. I want you to break me. I want you to throw me away. I'll put what I was originally gonna have, and not this morbid thing. I think it sounds funny. Oops. In fact, let me just erase the whole thing, the whole speech bubble. It looks kind of crappy. Oops. Mm. Be right back. I'm just gonna get something real quick. was thinking of watching something, or listening to something. I got my audiobooks that I'm about to unsubscribe to.
All the rest. With no alternative open to them, Rabe and the remaining foreigners drove frantically through Nanking, using their own automobiles to haul as much rice as possible into the zone. As the Japanese bombarded the city, the foreigners continued the deliveries. One driver actually lost an eye from flying shrapnel. In the end, the zone leaders secured only a fraction of the total food available: 10,000 tan of rice and 1,000 bags of flour. But the food went far to stave off hunger for many of the refugees in the zone. On December 9th, recognizing the dire situation ahead, the committee tried to negotiate a 3-day ceasefire, during which the Japanese could keep their positions and the Chinese could withdraw peacefully from the walled city. However, Chiang Kai-shek did not agree to the ceasefire, prompting the Japanese to begin a furious bombardment of Nanking the following day. On December 12th, the committee was again approached by the Chinese military, this time to negotiate a surrender. But again, the plan fell through. From that point on, there was little Rabe could do that day but watch and wait for the inevitable. He recorded the events as they unfolded, hour by hour. At 6:30 p.m. on December 12th, he wrote, "The cannons on the Purple Mountain fire continuously. There is lighting and thunder all around it. Suddenly the entire mountain is in flames. Some houses and munitions depots are also on fire." At that moment, Rabe recalled an ancient Chinese saying that portended the city's doom: "When the Purple Mountain burns, then Nanking is lost." At 8 p.m., Rabe watched as the skies to the south of the city glowed red with flames. Then he heard frantic knocking on both gates of his house. Chinese women and children were begging for entrance. Men were scaling the garden wall behind his German school. And people were cramming themselves into the foxholes in his garden, even ducking under the giant German flag he had used to warn pilots from bombing his property. The cries and knocking increased until Rabe could bear it no longer. He flung open the gates to let the crowd in, but the noise only intensified as the night wore on. Exasperated, Rabe donned a steel helmet and ran through his garden, yelling at everyone to shut up. At 11:30 p.m., Rabe received a surprise visitor. It was Christian Kroger, a fellow Nazi Party member in his mid-30s who worked for the German engineering firm of Karlovitz and Company. The tall blonde engineer had come to China to oversee the construction of a large steel mill, but found himself, like Rabe, in the midst of Nanking's insanity. The International Committee had appointed Kroger its treasurer. Kroger had stopped by to tell Rabe that Zhongshan Road was littered with weapons and supplies that the Chinese military had left behind during its retreat. Someone had even abandoned a bus, offering it for sale for $20. "Do you think someone will take it?" Kroger asked. "But Christian, how can they?" Rabe said. "Nah, I ordered the man to come into my office in the morning." Finally, the din around his house began to diminish. The exhausted Rabe, who had not had time even to change clothes for 2 days, lay back in bed, trying to relax, as the society he knew and loved collapsed around him. He knew that the Ministry of Communication building was burning down, and that the city would fall any minute. Rabe reassured himself that things would only get better, not worse, from this point on. You don't have to be scared of the Japanese, his Chinese colleagues had told him. As soon as they have taken over the city, peace and order will prevail. The rail connections with Shanghai will be quickly rebuilt, and the stores will return to their normal functions. Before he fell asleep, Rabe thought, "Thank God that the worst has been overcome." The next morning, Rabe awoke to the sound of yet another air raid. Apparently not all of the Chinese army had been forced from the city, he thought. It was only 5 a.m., so he laid down again. Like most people in the city, Rabe had become so jaded by air raids that the blasts no longer bothered him. Later that morning, Rabe explored the city to check out the extent of the damage. In the streets lay numerous Chinese corpses, many of them civilians who had been shot in the back. He watched a group of Japanese soldiers push their way into a German coffee house. When Rabe chastised them for stealing, pointing to the German flags on the house, an English-speaking Japanese soldier snapped, "We are hungry. If you want to complain, go to the Japanese embassy. They will pay for it." The Japanese soldiers also told Rabe that their supply column had not arrived, and they could not count on the column for any nourishment even if it did arrive. Later, Rabe learned that the soldiers looted the coffee house, then set it afire. Worse was to come. In the distance, Rabe saw Japanese soldiers marching north from the south side of Nanking to occupy the rest of the city. To avoid them, he immediately drove north and reached the main street of the city, Chungshan Road, stopping at the Red Cross Hospital in the Foreign Ministry. The Chinese staff had fled the premises, and bodies were everywhere, clogging the rooms, corridors, and even the exits from the hospital. That day, Rabe encountered the remains of the Chinese army, hungry and exhausted stragglers who had failed to cross the Yangtze River to safety. Driving through Shanxi Road Circle, he met 400 Chinese troops, all of them still armed, marching in the direction of the advancing Japanese army. It was then that Rabe had a sudden humanitarian impulse that was to haunt his conscience for months, if not years, afterwards. Warning them about the Japanese troops to the south, Rabe advised the Chinese soldiers to throw away their machine guns and join the refugees in the safety zone. After a short discussion, they agreed and followed Rabe into the zone. Similarly, when hundreds of Chinese soldiers found themselves trapped on the northern side of the city, unable to secure passage across the river, many broke into the safety zone, begging the American and European administrators to save their lives. The committee members were uncertain as to whether they should help them. After all, they had created the zone as a sanctuary for civilians, not soldiers. The committee tried to resolve the dilemma by addressing the issue with Japanese Army headquarters, but got no further than a captain on Hangzhou Road. Moved by the plight of the soldiers, the committee eventually caved in to their pleas. Like Rabe, they told the soldiers that if they laid down their arms, the Japanese might treat them mercifully. Then they helped the soldiers disarm and housed them in various buildings within the neutral area. In the confusion, many of the soldiers stripped off their uniforms and mingled with the civilians in the zone. The next day, John Rabe wrote a long letter explaining the situation to a Japanese military commander. He begged the Japanese to exercise mercy toward the former soldiers and to treat them humanely according to the recognized laws of war. To Rabe's great relief, a Japanese officer promised him that the lives of the Chinese soldiers would be spared. But relief turned into horror when the Japanese betrayed Rabe and seized the disarmed soldiers for execution. If Rabe had hoped that the Japanese would not be able to separate the troops from the hundreds of thousands of civilians, he was sorely mistaken. The Japanese detected virtually every one of the former soldiers by examining their hands, knowing that the daily use of guns caused calluses on certain areas on the fingers of soldiers. They also examined shoulders for backpack marks, foreheads and hair for indentations from military caps, and even feet for blisters caused from months of marching. During a staff conference the night of December 14th, the committee learned that the Japanese had rounded up 1,300 men in a safety zone camp near the headquarters to shoot them. We knew that there were a number of ex-soldiers among them, but Rabe had been promised by an officer that afternoon that their lives would be spared. George Fitch, the YMCA representative, wrote in his diary of the incident. It was now all too obvious what they were going to do. The men were lined up and roped together in groups of about 100 by soldiers with bayonets fixed. Those who had hats had them roughly torn off and thrown to the ground. And then by the lights of our headlights, we watched them marched away to their doom. Did I have the right to act that way? Rabe wrote later of his decision to quarter the soldiers in the zone. Did I handle that correctly? For the next few days, Rabe watched helplessly as the Japanese dragged thousands more soldiers from the zone and executed them. The Japanese killed thousands of innocent men who happened to have calluses on their fingers, foreheads, or feet, men who were rickshaw coolies, manual laborers, and police officers. Rabe later witnessed the Red Swastika Society, a charitable Buddhist organization in the city, pull more than 120 corpses from a single pond. In a later report, Rabe pointed out that several ponds in Nanking actually disappeared because they were so filled with corpses. As both head of the International Committee and local head of the Nazi Party, a position that was certain to carry some weight with the Japanese authorities, Rabe wrote letter after letter to the Japanese embassy. At first he was unfailingly polite, toning down his anger because of his perceived obligation as a German citizen and Nazi leader to maintain the relationship between the two embassies. He asked the American members of the committee to let him review their letters to the Japanese embassy so that he could put some honey into them as well. He maintained his polite tone in his personal visits to the embassy. In turn, the Japanese diplomats received Rabe's letters and visits with gracious smiles and official courtesy, but in the end he always received the same answer: "We shall inform the military authorities." As days passed, each bringing its own unrelenting onslaught of fresh atrocities, Rabe's written communication to the Japanese grew increasingly hostile, punctuated with exclamations of outrage. All 27 Westerners in the city at that time and our Chinese population were totally surprised by the reign of robbery, rapine, and killing initiated by your soldiers on the 14th. We did not find a single Japanese patrol either in the zone or at the entrances. Yesterday, in broad daylight, several women at the seminary were raped right in the middle of a large room filled with men, women, and children. We 22 Westerners cannot feed 200,000 Chinese civilians and protect them night and day. That is the duty of the Japanese authorities. If you can give them protection, we can help feed them. If this process of terrorism continues, it will be next to impossible to locate workers to get the essential services started. Gradually, Rabe and the rest of the International Committee began to read the real message in the diplomats' answers. It was the military, not the embassy, calling the shots. Fukuda Tokiyasu, secretary of the Japanese embassy, told Rabe as much by saying, "The Japanese army wants to make it very bad for the town, but we, the embassy, will try to prevent it." During the Great Rape, some Japanese embassy officials actually suggested that the International Committee seek publicity in Japan directly, so that public opinion would force the Japanese government to take action. But at the same time, another embassy official urged Rabe to remain silent, warning him that if you tell the newspaper reporters anything bad, you will have the entire Japanese army against you. Finally, with only his status as an official of an allied nation for protection, Rabe did what now seems the unthinkable. He began to roam about the city trying to prevent atrocities himself. Whenever he drove through Nanking, some man would inevitably leap out and stop the car to beg Rabe to stop a rape in progress, a rape that usually involved a sister, a wife, or a daughter. Rabe would then let the man climb into the car and direct him to the scene of the rape. Once there, he would chase Japanese soldiers away from their prey, on one occasion even bodily lifting a soldier sprawled on top of a young girl. He knew these expeditions were highly dangerous. The Japanese had pistols and bayonets, and I had only party symbols and my swastika armband, Rabe wrote in his report to Hitler. But nothing could deter him from making them, not even the risk of death. His diary entry on January 1st, 1938 is typical. The mother of a young attractive girl called out to me and, throwing herself on her knees, crying, said I should help her. Upon entering the house, I saw a Japanese soldier lying completely naked on a young girl who was crying hysterically. I yelled at this swine in any language it would be understood. "Happy New Year." and he fled from there, naked and with his pants in his hand. Rabe was appalled by the rape in the city. In the streets, he passed scores of female corpses, raped and mutilated, next to the charred remains of their homes. Groups of 3 to 10 marauding soldiers would begin by traveling through the city and robbing whatever there was to steal. Rabe wrote in his report to Hitler, "They would continue by raping the women and girls and killing anything and anyone that offered any resistance, attempted to run away from them, or simply happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. There were girls under the age of 8 and women over the age of 70 who were raped, and then in the most brutal way possible, knocked down and beat up. We found corpses of women on beer glasses and others who had been lanced by bamboo shoots. I saw the victims with my own eyes. I talked to some of them right before their deaths and had their bodies brought to the morgue at the Kulo hospital so that I could be personally convinced that all of these reports had touched on the truth." As he walked through the burning wreckage of his beloved city, Rabe could read on almost every street corner.
One second, I'm just checking my messages
Japanese posters
on my
that
phone.
proclaimed, "Trust our Japanese army. They will protect and feed you." Determined to save Chinese lives, Rabe sheltered as many people as he could, turning his house and office into sanctuary for Siemens employees and their families. Rabe also harbored hundreds of Chinese women on his property, permitting them to live in tiny straw huts in his backyard. With these women, Rabe developed a warning system to protect them from Japanese rapists. Whenever Japanese soldiers scaled the wall of his yard, the women would blow a whistle and send Rabe running out into the yard to chase the offenders away. This happened so frequently that Rabe rarely left his home at night, fearful that Japanese intruders would commit an orgy of rape in his absence. He complained about the situation to Japanese military officers, but they failed to take the matter seriously. Even when Rabe caught a Japanese soldier raping a woman in one of the backyard straw huts, a military officer did nothing to punish the rapist except slap him across the face. If Rabe was frustrated by the futility of the situation, by the limitations of what he and some 20 other individuals could accomplish to protect hundreds of thousands of civilians from more than 50,000 Japanese soldiers, he did not show it. He knew it was crucial to hide any sign of weakness from the Japanese and to overwhelm them with a domineering presence and energy. Fortunately, his status as a Nazi caused several Japanese soldiers to hesitate before committing further mayhem, at least in his presence. George Fitch, the local YMCA secretary, wrote that, "When any of them objects, Rabe thrusts his Nazi armband in their face and points to his Nazi decoration, the highest in the country, and asks them if they know what that means. It always works." The Japanese soldiers appeared to respect, at times even fear, the Nazis of Nanking, while the Japanese privates did not hesitate to beat up the Americans, charge at them with bayonets, or even to push one American missionary down a flight of stairs. They exercised considerable restraint in their dealings with Rabe and his countrymen. Once, when 4 Japanese soldiers in the midst of raping and looting saw Eduard Sperling's swastika armband, they screamed, "Deutsche! Deutsche!" and ran away. On another occasion, the swastika probably saved Rabe's life. One evening, Japanese soldiers broke into his property, and Rabe confronted them with his flashlight. One of them reached for his pistol as if to shoot Rabe, but stopped when he realized it would be bad business to shoot a German subject. If the Japanese respected Rabe, the Chinese refugee community revered him. To them, he was the man who rescued daughters from sexual slavery and sons from machine gun fire. Rabe's very presence sometimes touched off riots in safety zone camps. During one of his visits to the zone, thousands of Chinese women flung themselves to the ground before him, weeping and begging for protection, declaring they would rather commit suicide on the spot than leave the zone to be raped and tortured. Rabe tried to keep hope alive for his refugees in the midst of their terror. He hosted little birthday celebrations for the children born to refugee women living in his backyard. Each newborn received a gift, $10 for baby boys and $9.50 for baby girls. As Rabe explained in his report to Hitler, Girls in China aren't worth as much as boys. Typically, when a boy was born, he received Rabe's name, and if a girl was born, she received his wife's name, Dora. Rabe's
The
courage
explorer?
and generosity ultimately won the respect of the other members of the International Committee, even those fundamentally opposed to Nazism. George Fitch wrote to his friends that he would almost wear a Nazi badge to keep fellowship with Rabe and the other Germans in Nanking. Even Dr. Robert Wilson, a man thoroughly repulsed by Nazism, sang Rabe's praises in letters to his family. He is well up in Nazi circles, and after coming into such close contact with him as we have for the past few weeks, and discovering what a splendid man he is and what a tremendous heart he has, it is hard to reconcile his personality with his adulation of Der Führer. The only surgeon in Nanking. It is not surprising that Robert Wilson stayed in Nanking when virtually every other surgeon left, for Nanking, the city of his birth and boyhood, had always commanded a special place in his heart. Born in 1904, Wilson was reared by a family of Methodist missionaries who had shaped many of Nanking's educational institutions. His uncle, John Ferguson, founded the University of Nanking. His father worked as an ordained minister and middle school instructor in the city, while his mother, a college-educated Greek scholar who spoke several languages fluently, ran her own school for missionary children. As a teenager, Robert Wilson even learned geometry from Pearl Buck, who would later win the Nobel Prize in Literature for her novels about China. Thriving in this environment and displaying exceptional intellectual promise, Wilson won, at age 17, a scholarship to Princeton University. Upon graduation from college, he taught Latin and mathematics for 2 years at a high school in Connecticut, enrolled in Harvard Medical School, and then served as an intern at St. Luke's Hospital in New York, where he courted and married the head nurse. But rather than pursue a career in the United States, Wilson decided that his future lay in his hometown of Nanking, and taking his bride with him, he returned in 1935 to practice medicine at the University of Nanking Hospital. The first 2 years for the Wilsons were perhaps the most idyllic of their lives. Time was marked by a slow-paced charm, dinners with other missionary couples, elegant teas and receptions at foreign embassies, parties at sprawling country villas staffed with private cooks and coolies. In the evenings, he read ancient Chinese in its original text and studied under a private tutor to expand his knowledge of the language. He also took every Wednesday afternoon off to play tennis. Sometimes he and his wife would go to the lake together and have dinner on a boat, inhaling the perfumed air as they drifted through watery lanes of red lotus blossom. War, however, shattered forever the timeless serenity the Wilsons had enjoyed in Nanking. After the Marco Polo Bridge incident in July, the people of Nanking began to carry gas masks in the street, along with chemical solution and layers of gauze, fearing a Japanese poison gas attack. By August 1937, when the Japanese started to bomb the capital, his wife Marjorie had boarded a gunboat with their infant daughter Elizabeth and arrived safely at Kuling. But Wilson, fearing his wife and child would starve to death if the war continued, insisted that they return to the United States. Mrs. Wilson complied with his wishes and went back to work at St. Luke's in New York, while her mother cared for the baby. But there was no question that Dr. Wilson himself would stay in Nanking. He saw this as his duty, his wife recalled almost 60 years later. The Chinese were his people. No doubt to dispel loneliness that autumn, Wilson moved into the house of J. Lossing Buck, the former husband of Pearl Buck, and the house soon filled up with his friends, the surgeon Richard Brady, the United Christian missionary James McCallum, and other people who would later serve as members of the International Committee for the Nanking Safety Zone. Like Wilson, many of these men had sent their wives and children away from Nanking. When he wasn't busy with patients, Wilson often wrote letters home to his family. Most contained gruesome descriptions of the victims of Japanese bombs, such as the girl who had crouched with her back to an explosion only to have her buttocks ripped off. From the casualties of war, he dug out a growing heap of shrapnel and bullets. Enough, he wrote cynically, to open a respectable museum before the war was over. Even though he knew that the Japanese had no qualms about bombing hospitals, Wilson continued to go to work. on September 25th in one of the worst air raids Nanking had ever experienced. The Japanese aimed two 1,000-pound bombs at the Central Hospital and Ministry of Health, despite the presence of a large red cross clearly painted on one of the roofs. The bombs landed only 50 feet away from a dugout where 100 doctors and nurses were hiding. Wilson did everything possible in the hospital to minimize the risk of attracting Japanese bombs. Heavy black curtains were drawn over the windows to hide lit rooms from Japanese aviators. But the city crawled with rumors of spies guiding pilots to key targets with red and green lanterns at night. During one raid, a stranger crept into the hospital with a red shielded flashlight instead of a green or black shielded one, and aroused suspicions when he tried to open a window that had been securely shut to prevent the seepage of poison gas. He raised even more eyebrows when he asked a Chinese aviator patient a number of unusual questions about the flying height and range of Chinese bombers. As autumn drew to a close, Wilson found himself tremendously overworked. More people needed medical attention than ever before, not only civilian victims of Japanese bombs, but veterans from Shanghai. There were approximately 100,000 wounded Chinese veterans in hospitals between Shanghai and the city of Yoooo. Trainload after trainload dumped them off at the station in Xiaquan, the northern Nanking suburb. Some lay dying on the floor of the station, while others limped aimlessly through the capital. Soldiers who healed were returned to the front, but those who lost arms or legs, those crippled beyond hope, were simply turned loose with $2 compensations and instructions to go home. Home was far away for most soldiers. Few had the money or physical energy to get there. Abandoned by their leaders, stranded in the Shanghai-Nanking area, thousands of Chinese veterans, blind, lame, rotting away from wounds and infections, were reduced to begging in the streets. As the situation worsened, the staff at the hospital shrank. Chinese doctors and nurses fled the city, joining the hundreds of thousands of Nanking residents in their westward migration. Wilson did all he could to dissuade his medical staff from leaving, insisting that under martial law they would have nothing to fear after the city fell. Ultimately, however, he was unable to convince them to stay. By the end of the first week of December, there were only 3 doctors at the University of Nanking Hospital: Robert Wilson, C.S. Trimmer, and a Chinese physician. When Richard Brady, the only other American surgeon in the city, left Nanking because his little girl was seriously ill in Kuling, Wilson was the only person left to perform the hourly amputations. "It is quite a sensation," he wrote on December 7th, "to be the only surgeon in a big war-torn city." A week later, Wilson nearly lost his life. On the afternoon of December 13, he had decided to perform a delicate operation on a patient who had suffered severe eye injury from a bomb. Wilson had to remove what was left of the eye in order to save the other one. The eyeball was halfway out when a shell landed 50 yards away from Wilson and exploded, shattering the windows and spraying the room with shrapnel. No one was killed or injured, but Wilson noted that the nurses were naturally pretty shaky and wanted to know whether they should continue the operation. "There was obviously nothing else to do," Wilson wrote, "but I don't think any eyes have come out that fast." By nightfall of December 13th, the Japanese had seized complete control of the ancient capital. Wilson saw Japanese flags fluttering all over town. The following day, the conquering army began to take over the hospitals in the city. They broke into the main hospital of the Chinese army, located within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and run by safety zone members who had organized themselves as a chapter of the Red Cross, and trapped hundreds of Chinese soldiers inside. The Japanese forbade doctors to enter the hospital or send food to the wounded soldiers, who were later marched out and systematically shot. After 3 out of 4 Red Cross hospitals fell in this manner to the Japanese, the International Committee concentrated its efforts on the University of Nanking Hospital. During the first few days of occupation, Wilson watched the Japanese soldiers loot and burn the city. He saw them rob the University of Nanking Hospital, and frustrated that he could not stop all of the thefts, mentally aimed a swift kick at a soldier who tried to steal a camera from a nurse. He also watched soldiers burn a heap of musical instruments in the street. and wondered whether the destruction of property was a Japanese plot to compel the people of Nanking to buy Japanese goods later. Wilson even witnessed the ransacking of his own home. Venturing to his house to survey possible damage, he caught red-handed 3 Japanese soldiers in the process of looting it. They had broken into the attic, opened up a big trunk, and strewn its contents all over the floor. One of them was peering into a microscope when Wilson walked in. Upon seeing him, all 3 soldiers ran down the stairs and out the door. The crowning insult was on the 2nd floor, where one had just finished depositing his calling card on the floor of the toilet, within a foot of the toilet bowl, Wilson wrote. He had covered it with a clean towel which had been left hanging in the room. But nothing of the looting could compare to the rape and murder that he witnessed in the city. Even Wilson, now a jaded war surgeon, found the intensity of the atrocities shocking. December 15th. The slaughter of civilians is appalling. I could go on for pages, telling of cases of rape and brutality, almost beyond belief. December 18th. Today marks the 6th day of modern Dante's Inferno, written in huge letters with blood and rape. Murder by the wholesale and rape by the thousands of cases. There seems to be no stop to the ferocity, lust, and stavism of the brutes. At first I tried to be pleasant to them to avoid arousing their ire, but the smile has gradually worn off and my stare is fully as cool and fishy as theirs. December 19th. All the food is being stolen from the poor people and they are in a state of terror-stricken hysterical panic. When will it stop? Christmas Eve. Now they tell us that there are 20,000 soldiers still in the zone. Where they get their figures, no one knows. And that they are going to hunt them out and shoot them all. That will mean every able-bodied male between the ages of 18 and 50 that is now in the city. How can they ever look anybody in the face again? By the end of the year, his letters carried a fatalistic air. The only consolation is that it can't be worse, he wrote on December 30th. They can't kill as many people as there aren't any more to kill. Frequently, Wilson and the others saw the Japanese round up Chinese soldiers, shoot them, and stuff the bodies in dirt air raid shelters that doubled as mass graves. But Wilson heard that many Chinese people were executed not because they posed any threat to the Japanese army, but because their bodies served a practical purpose. After the fall of Nanking, the big trenches that the Chinese had built for tank traps were filled to the brim by the Chinese with the bodies of dead and wounded soldiers. When the Japanese failed to find enough bodies of dead soldiers so tanks could pass over them, they shot nearby residents and threw them in the trenches as well. The witness who told Wilson the story borrowed a camera so that he could take pictures to confirm his statements. There was very little Wilson could do to prevent these murders. The Japanese soldiers he confronted often made a point of conspicuously playing with their weapons, loading and unloading them, in order to intimidate him and other foreigners. Wilson fully expected to be shot in the back at any moment. One of the worst scenes Wilson saw in Nanking, a scene he would remember for the rest of his life, was a massive gang rape of teenage girls in the street. A group of young women between the ages of 15 and 18 were lined up by the Japanese and then raped in the dirt, one after another, by an entire regiment. Some hemorrhaged and died, while others killed themselves shortly afterwards. But the scenes in the hospitals were even more horrifying than those in the streets. Wilson was mortified by the women who came to the emergency room with their bellies ripped open, by the charred and horrified disfigured men whom the Japanese tried to burn alive, and by numerous other horrors he barely had time to describe on paper. He told his wife that he would never forget the woman whose head was nearly cut off, teetering from a point on her neck. This morning came another woman in a sad plight and with a horrible story. A hospital volunteer wrote of this woman in his diary on January 3, 1938. She was one of the 5 women whom the Japanese soldiers had taken to one of their medical units to wash their clothes by day, to be raped by night. 2 of them were forced to satisfy from 15 to 20 men, and the prettiest one as many as 40 each night. This one who came to us had been called off by 3 soldiers into an isolated place where they attempted to cut off her head. The muscles of the neck had been cut, but they failed to sever the spinal cord. She feigned death, but dragged herself to the hospital, another of the many to bear witness to the brutality of soldiers. Yet in the midst of their pain and suffering, Wilson was amazed by the willpower of some of his patients. In a letter to his family dated New Year's Day 1938, he told an incredible account of survival. Chinese soldiers burned down the home of a 29-year-old woman in a tiny village south of Nanking, forcing her to head for the capital by foot with her 5 small children. By nightfall, a Japanese airplane dove down at them, strafing the family with machine gun fire and sending a bullet through the mother's right eye and out her neck. She fainted in shock, but awoke the next morning lying in a pool of blood next to her crying children. Too weak to carry her youngest child, a 3-month-old baby, she left it behind in an empty house. Yet she somehow found the strength to struggle on to Nanking with her 4 remaining children, making her way successfully to the hospital. Wilson and other volunteers stayed in the hospital until they wavered on the verge of collapse. The International Committee could have used medical help from outside the city, but the Japanese would not permit doctors or medical volunteers to enter Nanking. So the burden of caring for the sick and administering the zone fell on this tiny, beleaguered committee of no more than some 20 individuals. They worked in shifts to ensure that the hospital was guarded from the Japanese by at least one foreigner 24 hours a day. Some of them became so overworked that they succumbed to colds, flu, and various other illnesses. During the massacre, the only other Western doctor in the city, C.S. Trimmer, struggled with a fever of 102 degrees. The University of Nanking Hospital swiftly became another refugee camp because Wilson refused to discharge patients who had no place to go. Patients who did leave the hospital were accompanied by foreigners to ensure that they returned home safely. James McCallum acted as the hospital chauffeur, driving patients about town in unpainted, patched-up ambulances. Survivors of the massacre remember that the exhausted McCallum pressed cold towels against his face to stay awake as he drove patients home. But when even cold towels failed to keep his eyes open, McCallum resorted to chewing his tongue until it bled. Few people in Nanking pushed themselves as hard as Wilson did in the hospital. When the massacre and rapes gradually subsided, several of the other physicians went to Shanghai every weekend to recover from the strain. But Wilson continued to operate on patients relentlessly, day and night, around the clock. His selflessness was remembered almost 60 years later by survivors who spoke of Wilson with great reverence, at least one of them discussing in detail the preparation and successful result of his operation under Wilson's hands. He operated for free because few patients had money to pay him, but the surgeries exacted a terrible price from his own health. In the end, his family believes that only his faith as a devout Methodist, combined with his love for China, gave him the courage to survive the rape of Nanking. The living goddess of Nanking. Wilhelmina Vautrin, or Minnie Vautrin as most people called her, by occupation head of the Education Department and Dean of Studies at Ginling Women's Arts and Science College, was one of the few Western women in the city during the first few weeks of the Nanking Massacre. Years later, she would be remembered not only for her courage in protecting thousands of women from Japanese soldiers, but also for the diary she kept, a diary that some historians believe will eventually be recognized, much like the diary of Anne Frank, for its importance in illuminating the spirit of a single witness during a Holocaust of war. Vautrin, the daughter of a blacksmith, was 51 years old in 1937. Raised in the tiny farming community of Secor, Illinois, she was sent to live with neighbors when her mother died 6 years later. In their homes, Vautrin was often treated little better than a servant or field hand, and she found herself herding cattle during the bleakest months of winter. Despite the impoverishment of her childhood, she was able to work her way through school, graduating with honors in 1912 from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Tall and handsome in her youth, with long dark hair, she was a vivacious and popular woman who attracted numerous suitors. But by the time she graduated from the University of Illinois, she had made up her mind to forego marriage. Instead, she joined the United Christian Missionary Association and moved to Hefei, a city in the Anhui province of China, where she worked for 7 years as the principal of a girls' school and learned to speak Chinese. Then Vautrin moved to Nanking, to the position she held at the time of the massacre. Vautrin was clearly very happy in Nanking. On visits to her hometown in Illinois, she talked incessantly of China, its culture, its people, and its history. She gave her family silkworm cocoons and taught them how to cook and eat Chinese food. In her diary, she never ceased to marvel at the beauty of the Nanking landscape. An avid gardener, she planted roses and chrysanthemums at Ginling College, visiting greenhouses at Sun Yat-sen Memorial Park, walking down the fragrant lanes of plum and peach trees near the Ming Tombs. In the summer of 1937, while vacationing with friends in the seaside summer resort of Tsingtao, Vautrin heard that a Japanese soldier had disappeared a few miles south of Peking. The disappearance triggered several battles between the Chinese and Japanese in the area, prompting a friend of hers to comment darkly that the assassination of only 2 people in Sarajevo in 1914 had eventually culminated in the deaths of more than 11 million people. Still, Vautrin refused to join the other Americans evacuating Nanking, and so the American embassy lent her a new 9-foot American flag to lay flat on the center of the grassy quadrangle of Ginling College to protect the campus against Japanese pilots. The embassy staff also gave her and the other International Committee members lengths of rope to knot into ladders, and told them that once the Panay departed with the American embassy officials and the Chinese military slammed all the gates shut, their only hope of escape would be over the city walls. But Vautrin hardly had time to think about running away. With most of the faculty gone from Nanking, most had abandoned their homes to flee to cities like Shanghai, Chengdu, and Sichuan. Vautrin was now the acting head of the institution. She labored to prepare the campus for female refugees and to evacuate wounded soldiers from the area. To disguise their identities, she burned their military papers and garments in the college incinerator. Under their direction, furniture was moved into attics, safes were emptied, dorms were cleaned, and valuables were wrapped in oil paper and hidden. Meanwhile, posters, signs, and armbands for the Nanking Safety Zone were created and distributed among volunteers. Vautrin also commissioned the sewing of a second American flag, this one 27 feet long. But the Chinese tailor who put it together accidentally sewed the blue field with the stars on the lower left-hand corner instead of the upper. By the second week of December, the gates of Ginling opened for women and children. Thousands of people poured in. Refugees were passing through the city at the rate of 1,000 a day. Many of them, exhausted, bewildered, and hungry, came into the safety zone camps with only the clothing on their backs. From 8:30 this morning until 6 this evening, excepting for the noon meal, I have stood at the front gate while the refugees poured in, she continued.
Alright, I'm gonna get going here
There is
soon.
terror in the faces of many of the women.
It's getting pretty late.
Last night was a terrible night.
And I was
in
up
the
way
city.
too late
Many
yesterday.
young women were taken from their
I'm
homes
just gonna
by the
finish.
Japanese soldiers. Vautrin allowed the women and children to come in freely,
This little
but
tarp.
implored older women to stay home, to leave space for the
And
younger ones.
speed through it.
Few women took her suggestion, and most begged just for a place to sit on the lawn. By the night of December 15th, the population of the camps at Ginling had swelled to more than 3,000 people. The next day, Japanese soldiers stormed the college. At 10 a.m. on December 16th, more than 100 Japanese troops burst onto the Ginling campus to inspect the buildings for hidden Chinese soldiers. They demanded that every door be opened, and if a key was not forthcoming, a Japanese soldier stood ready with an axe to break down the door by force. Vautrin's heart sank at the thought of the Japanese finding the hundreds of padded garments stored in the geography department office upstairs. But fortunately, an attic packed with 200 Chinese women and children diverted the Japanese soldiers' attention. Vautrin later buried the garments to hide them from the Japanese. Twice that day, the Japanese seized servants on campus and started to drag them away. They certainly would have been killed if Vautrin had not rescued them with cries of, "No soldier, coolie!" Only later did she learn that the Japanese had trained at least 6 machine guns on the campus, with many more soldiers on guard outside, ready to shoot anyone who attempted to run away. That evening, Vautrin saw women being carted away in the streets and heard their desperate pleas. A truck went by with 8 to 10 girls, and as it passed, she heard them scream, "Jiu Ming! Jiu Ming! Save our lives." The following day, December 17th, 1937, was even worse. The migration of women into Ginling only intensified as Japanese soldiers flooded the city. What a heartbreaking sight, Vautrin wrote. Weary women, frightened girls, trudging with children and bedding and small packages of clothes. If only someone had time to write the story of each refugee who came in, she thought, especially the stories of the girls who had blackened their faces and cut their hair. As she accommodated the stream of wild-eyed women, she heard stories of the Japanese raping girls as young as 12 and women as elderly as 60, or raping pregnant women at bayonet point. The harried Vautrin spent the entire day trying to secure food for the refugees, direct Chinese men to other camps in the safety zone, and run to areas on campus where Japanese soldiers had been sighted. But nothing prepared Vautrin for the encounter that awaited her that evening. 2 Japanese soldiers were pulling at the door of the central building, demanding that Vautrin open it immediately. But when she insisted that she had no key and that no soldiers were hiding inside, a Japanese soldier slapped her in the face and also struck the Chinese man next to her. Then she saw 2 Japanese soldiers lead away 3 bound servants from the college. She followed them to the front gate where the Japanese had forced a large group of Chinese to kneel beside the road. The Japanese demanded to speak to the master of the institution, and learning that it was Vautrin, ordered her to identify every kneeling person. One man in the party spoke up to help Vautrin, and for this he was slapped severely.
Okay.
In the midst of this ordeal, 3 committee
yeah.
members drove up.
Thank you for
The
lurking.
YMCA
Thank you
Secretary
for
George Fitch, the Nanking University
excuse me.
sociology professor.
enduring my audiobook, which I'm sure is not appropriate for most circles. So I'm gonna get going. Yeah. Take care. Have a good night. Peace out. Later. Like, subscribe if you like over on YouTube. You don't have to. But if you do, do it. Do it. But it's fine if you don't want to. I love you still. I gotta go.